I want to welcome Richard Katrovas to the Meacham workshops, all the way down from Michigan and Czech Republic.
Yes.
And we've been beginning these interviews with having the poet read a poem.
Yeah, you know, it's always difficult to know what to read in this kind of situation. I'm going to read this poem because every year I get like 1 or 2 letters from high school kids who are made to explicate this poem, and I have no idea why. It's called A Dog and a Boy. Joe Brickhouse saw his dog get smashed by a garbage truck in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. He was 12 and smoked Luckies and had a glass eye. I won't tell you about the games of marbles or how he fucked his sister, nor shall I discuss in the abstract his deep-seated contempt for authority or why he kicked my ass just because I was his friend and he loved me. For this is about a dog and a boy and has virtually nothing to do with Mark Twain and the rest of American literature. It's about a garbage truck that backed up over a beautiful lab and a white kid who wrapped his arms around the dead animal and gasped for air as his face turned red then bluish, whose tears streamed onto the blood-caked fur of the dog, and who howled and screamed so loud at gray and porch-lit 5 a.m., windows all down Merrimack scraped open, and T-shirts, drawers, scrungy robes hobbled onto porches to stare in wonder at a human being who had learned so young how to talk to the dead.
Wow. 2 questions I want to ask you. One is how the poem began, and also, what do these high school kids say?
I have no idea.
Oh.
Their teachers make them, it's high school and college kids, you know, and I don't know, I have no idea why. It appeared in an anthology,
Okay.
you know, and I don't know. But for some reason, they are attracted. They're attracted. Their teachers tell them to. You know, it's got a couple of bad words in it. You know, whatever. You know, it's got a dog, dead dog. You know, and
So, but they never tell you exactly what they're...
no, what they do. I'm sure other writers have had this experience. They write and ask for inside info. You know, they want to know, you know, they want some inside info, what it really means, so they can write a really good paper and get an A, you know. So that's what it's about.
How did it begin?
I can't remember. You know, this is like, you know, something I wrote in the 70s, and it's a memory. It's a memory of a real kid who had a glass eye. And, you know, there's no imagination in this poem. It's all remembering. It's all, you know, this kid, Joe Brickhouse, really did take out his eye when he ran out of marbles and used it. And if we won his eye, our mothers would make us give it back. You know, so it was, you know, and he was. I mean, he was like, I'm sure he did not live beyond the age of 20. You know, I mean, he lived rough, and it was a rough neighborhood, and it was a rough life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, generally, how do you begin a poem?
You know, Rick, you know, anymore, I knocked out a new book of poems. This is my selected. And for 10 years, I didn't write verse. And then I started writing verse again. And when I did, I wrote like a madman for about 3 months. And it was all incredibly, it was all very formal, very traditional in terms of form. And then I stopped, you know, so I wrote a new book of poetry, and then I stopped writing verse again, you know, and I haven't written for a couple of years. So my relation to poetry as such is problematic. I mean, it's you know, I consider myself a writer, you know, and I write fiction and poetry and essays, and occasionally I write verse. But when I do write verse, it's unlike the poem I just read. It's usually quite formal stuff, you know, metrical, very metrical and rhyme, you know. And I have no idea why. It's not because I have any kind of ideological axe to grind. I just, for whatever reasons, temperamentally, that's where I go.
Well, I know you've written these dithyrambs, feuilletons,
Right.
formal poems, or free verse type of poems.
Yeah.
Small prose pieces. Is there a certain kind of subject that lends itself to one of those forms or another, or is it depend on your mood, what you've been doing?
You know, I wrote. I was primarily a poet for whatever, whatever that means, for many years. And then I decided that I wanted to teach myself to write good prose. And and I set about the task of being a novelist and writing novels and writing short stories and also learning to write personal essays. So it's really, my desire to teach myself to be a writer beyond verse, But my training early on was verse, and I studied prosody religiously. I mean, I really consider myself, if I know anything about literature, I know prosody. That's what I know. That's my area. I've studied it deeply, and anymore when I teach poetry, what I'm teaching is prosody.
Wow, yeah. Do you find that the prose you write, and whether it's fiction or memoir, personal essay, and the poems, they sort of affect one another?
Yeah, to some extent. What's been happening is that as a memoirist, I've gone over the same ground that I traveled as a poet. So as so many other poets have had this experience when they delve into memoir. You find yourself going into the same material basically, and rendering it otherwise, rendering it other than, in something other than verse, and that's been my experience. I've been as a prose writer, especially, but as a fiction writer, it's a different game. I've been especially lately writing short stories set in Prague, and from the perspective of American expatriates, and I've been exploring how Prague has changed relative to the expatriate experience, for ignorant, incredibly stupid Americans, who are living there and and not learning the language as well as they should, inadvertently condescending to Czechs who culturally are way beyond them, and that whole dynamic, is what I've been interested in, particularly regarding Roma, or gypsies, and the ways in which the Czechs are so incredibly racist, and how I've been trying to come to terms with how Czech racism relative to Roma, how it equates in terms of the American experience, obviously of racism relative to people of color in America. I've been I've been exploring that dynamic.
Yeah, I found a similar thing with the Roma in Hungary,
it's all over Europe,
Romania especially, which is where they first came in,
right.
And Serbia to some extent too. Yeah, it's a huge problem, I think, over there.
Yeah, and we do it. We don't do it justice when we make an absolute comparison with racism in America. It's a different dynamic entirely, and in some in some ways, American racism is more evil, and for reasons we can't go into here, but I've been trying to understand, my role as a white American in American society through the lens of the European experience regarding Roma, and it's complex and deeply interesting.
I know you direct the Prague Summer Program.
Yes.
Over there, and live part of the time over there. And how do you find the students there when they come? Are they seem to be, when I've been there a couple of times, seem to be incredibly anxious to learn about the culture and some, beginnings of the language.
Yeah, to my mind, what's valuable about the Prague Summer Program is that it defamiliarizes the American language, and Americanness for students. They come to Prague with these big American literary ambitions, and they're humbled in a very good way, I think. When they come into contact with an Arno Schlustig, bless his heart, he passed this past year, or a Pavel Schrute, these towering talents who create beautiful literature in a small language. you know, and their relation to their art is so fundamentally different than what these kids' relation to their own ambition is, you know, and I think that's the primary thing, and also, you know, the young writers who come there they're I think appropriately humbled, but they're also dazzled by, you know, an incredibly beautiful city, and many of them are coming, you know, are out of America for the first time in their lives, and so, you know, I am humbled by you know, the beautiful experience of shepherding these kids, you know, through this experience. You know, I feel like the Prague program, which has had close to 2,000 people pass through it over the 19 years of its existence, has had a small though significant effect on American literature and culture.
Yeah. And you've been influenced by a lot of Czech writers yourself. I can see that from the earlier poems to the later ones.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, yeah. Sure, I've been influenced. You know, I've been humbled. You know, I was married to a Czech woman. I have 3 Czech American daughters. My Czech sucks. You know, I don't speak well. I understand, but I don't speak very well. And you know, I don't care. You know, I've over the 21 years that I've been, you know, connected to the Czech Republic, you know, I've had a love-hate relationship with the place. You know, it's you know, I'm repulsed by the racism of the Czech people generally. I'm repulsed by their provinciality. I'm also humbled by the beauty of their culture. I'm humbled by their deep sense of irony, you know. And all in all, you know, it's truly a beautiful place, you know, and that has, you know, for 1,000 years been trying to maintain itself as an entity, you know. And the only thing that really defines Czechness is the language, which the Poles call baby Polish, because it has so many diminutives and it's so similar to Polish, you know. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for joining us.
Good talking to you. Yeah.